I'm very, very not worthy. I'm a sinful person, and I've got enough excuses to tell you why I went down that road to try and make that it was righteous, right? But none of it works. I was born to a Greek father that, from what I know, was given away to a fishing village in Greece at the age of 12. He was sold off as a child. He had 2 sisters and 1 brother. He got conscripted to go to the Vietnam War. And as the ship sailed into Sydney, he jumped ship in Sydney as an illegal immigrant, so he didn't have to go to war. Right? My mother is from Never Never Land out here, halfway to Adelaide, in the middle of nowhere. I can't remember what the town's called, right? From a very dysfunctional family. Okay. Her father was always at the pub. The mother ran off with another man that was about my mother's age, or just a little bit older, and left my mother and the younger sister, and my mother had to look after her. I think she might have been the age of 10 or 12 or something like that. But she has an older sister and an older brother that had already moved out and were married in the same area out in the middle of nowhere. But then the mother came back with a new husband and got my mother and the younger sister, took them to Sydney, and she met my father. And they got married. Only speculation what happened, that it wasn't a very good marriage, and my mother left him when I was 4 for another man. And from what I gather, my father wasn't very faithful either, and that's probably why my mother left. Okay? My father called me Emanuel Arkoulis. His last name's Arkoulis. Right? That's what he named me. But my mother didn't want that or didn't like that. She remarried and she changed our name. But at the time, she changed mine and my sister's name, my sister's last name, but my whole name was changed, to a new husband without my father's consent. I don't remember this, but from what I've been told and what I visual, he used to still come and pick us up on weekends and take us. But my mother changed our names, and all I remember is sitting in the back of the car with my father and I guess his new wife, and him and my sister having an argument because she told him that we've got new names, and he lost the plot. And since then, my sister didn't want to have anything to do with him, and I was only 4, so I don't really know what was going on, and I haven't seen him since. Okay, I did contact him 20 years ago. The reason I contacted him, when I was 20 years of age, I was a mechanic by trade, but I left there and I started doing fencing because there was no money in mechanics. I was fencing a place in Sydney, and this crazy Greek lady was sitting in the park staring at me for 4 hours. And the bloke I was working with, he was picking on me and saying this and saying, oh, she's looking at you and all this. After 4 hours, she walked up and she said, what's your name? And I knew my name had been changed, and I wasn't thinking anything of it. I said, why do you ask? She said, because you look exactly like my son. And I didn't know how to respond to that, right? Because from my understanding, my mother was my mother that I lived with. I had a father, but now I have a stepfather. What's going on here? So I walked away. Right? Now I'll go back into that later on in the thing. But so when I rang up, my auntie said, why don't you ring him? I said, I don't even know where he is or whatever, because I didn't realise that was his wife. Okay? I looked up the white pages. What are the odds? I looked up the white pages. There's one Arkoulis in Australia. My father's name is Mario, and it's M. Arkoulis. The address is right across the road from that park that I fenced. So I didn't think much of it, so I rang up. Didn't think ahead of these things. I rang up, some lady answered. I said, oh, can I speak to Mario? She said, who's calling? And I was like, oh crap, what do I do about that? I said, I'm his son. And the phone went very silent. And I said, I think I met you. You come up and talk to me over in the park and said I look like your son. She said, I remember that. Anyway, she started asking questions. I could hear him in the background going off his nana. And then he'd come up and he said, who's this? I said, I'm your son. He said, I've got no money for you. I said, I'm not after your money. I was in Western Australia then. I said, I'm very successful, own my own house, not after your money, just want to know if you want to have a relationship. And he said, what's your name? And I said, look, you know the situation there. I'm not responsible for that situation. Anyway, he chucked a wobbly and he gave the phone back to his wife and she said, look, give us some time and I'll ring you back. Anyway, 3 months later she rang back and said, Mario said it's not appropriate for you to have anything to do with his family. So I'm sure everyone can imagine how hurtful that may be. Right, so just put that out there as we go down and think about it. It was my father, my mother. I won't go into too much with that. But when my mother remarried, we moved to Layla Park near Blacktown. And I started school. I was only 4, so 5 years I started school. And I think at the age of 6 or 7, I had a girlfriend, Tony Collette, the actor. Now this was not my choice. This was I'll go into this a bit. I turned up at school, and this girl and her friend latched onto me and said that she needs to be your girlfriend. And I have no idea what even that was at that age, right? But then she convinced me to steal from my sister to bring stuff to her at school. Right? So my first lesson at school was how to steal from somebody that's now famous. However, we got caught in that. I got in a lot of trouble. She got in a lot of trouble, and I think she got removed from the school because I don't remember ever being there again. And I'm fast forwarding through a bit of this. So then my mother and my stepfather, which as a young person I knew that he wasn't my real father, but you just sort of looked at him and he was pretty good to me for quite a few years. But my sister was always the chosen one. Okay? I never knew that till now, or recently, is because I never knew this, but my mother and my stepfather had something against me because I looked like my father. And they often would see me and remind me of him. And for whatever went on in that life, I don't know. But there was something obviously that wasn't good. Anyway, we moved to West Guildford, and then I went to high school. I've been illiterate all my life, 44 years. Well, my wife can testimony to this, that at the age of 44, if I wrote her a Christmas card, it looked like one of your 3-year-old children wrote it. And I couldn't spell, it was messy. Okay? So in high school, I was in the same classes to learn how to read and write as John Ibrahim, the King of the Cross. And his brother Sam was friends with my sister in her year. Alright? So it was a very interesting life down there at that stage where chaos, violence and even murder was constant at school, around school, down the road from school, and no one was ever caught, but we always knew who did it. Alright? So it's a pretty big allegation, but it's and to see where they've become now makes sense to what it is. So because we were both illiterate, you were a target, all right, and you got picked on. John learned how to fight, and I learned how to run, all right, and obviously he had his brother as well, right, to back him up. So it wasn't a very good school that I learned in. However, I wanted to leave school early. I was not allowed. I left school to become a mechanic. Don't ask me how I passed all that, because theory was really bad, but practical was good because I used to have to go home, pull something apart to learn out how it worked so I could answer the test, because I couldn't read and write. So I struggled for a lot of life, right? And then a friend of mine came and taught me how to do fencing, so I travelled to Australia at the age of 21 fencing, okay? As my age of then, there was a lot of neglect in my life, like as in, I had a family, the rest of it, but there wasn't a lot of love or anything. There was, I mean, if I went around Australia for 3 years, I wouldn't even get a phone call. The only time I'd hear from my family, so I rang them. But in my journey, there was a lot of violence. And in the beginning, I still had morals, like you get a girlfriend, you get married, all the rest of it. So I didn't start till later on, till maybe 18 or 20, and I had a girlfriend. And in a very short time, we moved in together, and my stepfather said, once you move out, you can't move back home. All right? And within a very short time, I come home one night and she was in bed with someone else. So my understanding of relationships wasn't real good. And then you go down that, so then I got another one, and the same thing happened. And then another one, and the same thing happened. And it just kept going down that cycle. What I couldn't understand is all my friends were playing up on their girlfriends, and I was trying to be loyal, and the opposite was happening to me. Sadly, my respect for women went downhill in a very, very, very rapid pace. And I became like them. I was very unloyal, and what I learnt at an early age was women were looking for love, some, and men were looking for lust. So I preyed on women because I knew that. Right? So it's a very sad, sad thing that most men know and do. But I've seen the other side where women are just as bad as men. I'm not saying all women, but you can fall into that trap. But what I noticed was the women that fell into that trap came through horrific lives that had turned them into hating men and doing the same thing. Okay? That past of mine is a back door that tries to open its time all the time. And I'm not trying to... Some people might understand me, because I don't think a lot of people understand, like, especially in ministry, when women come, I'm really cold to most women. You know what I mean? You're not going to get a lot of cuddles, hugs, kisses or anything out of me, right? Because when I got saved, I found that in some churches that I go to, that situation was worse in ministry than it was on the streets. And I was pretty disgusted about it. Right? So I learned early to keep them doors shut. I'm not saying anyone here is in that situation, but I'm not going to open that door for whatever, because you see in ministry in different places where people fall into this thing for whatever reason, right? But the unclean world's going to try its best to open them doors. Okay, so I'm just saying be careful where you go and what you get and what situations are trying to be forced open, okay? So I won't go on too much more of my life other than I believe I became a threat at a young age to the unclean world. I never knew God. But when I was at the age of 10, I woke up in the middle of the night, and my room had a massive big window, twice the size of that window, and it had Venetian blinds, and I woke up and the Venetian blinds blew up and were holding against the roof. Right? And I was laying there thinking, what's going on here? Right? And then when they come back, it's spooky. So when they come back down, I thought the window must be open and the wind got it. So I opened the blinds and both the windows were shut. Right? But there wasn't really a fear. But I've asked God about it recently, and he said, that was my spirit looking over you. And I thought, well, what does that mean? He hasn't answered any more than that yet, so I don't know. But then at the age of about 26, 27, my stepfather passed away. He went overseas, and I don't believe him and my mother's relationship was very good, because when he passed away, I was constantly picking letters off his window of his car with women's name and phone numbers saying ring me. Right? So what you learn as a kid, and what I learned as a kid, can be, call it what you want, can be cursed against you. You can learn these things that you don't even really want to know. Okay? So when I was about 26, out drinking a lot, I never thought I was an alcoholic, but I used to go out 6-7 nights a week and get wasted. Never got into drugs, but alcohol was high priority. I stand outside the bank the next morning while my partner that I worked with, he went inside to get more money out so he could go out and go to the pub again. I stand out the front, hung over a real mess. This lady come up to me. This was in Noosa. She come up to me and said, Jesus loves you and he's happy. And I thought, what a nutcase. You know, that voice has never left my head from the time she said it. So I just say that if God sends you up to say some weird things to some people, just do it, because it's helping their journey. Okay? So my pretty wild life in Sydney and girlfriends and violence, and the violence happened where you'd go out with somebody and they were as bad as me. They could be married, have partners or whatever, and often their partners would find out, and then they'd come after me. Right? Even I was at work once, and I was up at Inverell. We used to do a lot of power stations, razor wire, and jails and detention centres. So I used to travel a lot and make quite a bit of money travelling Australia doing fencing. When I was 28, 27, I bought 2 houses in Sydney. So I come from a very poor family, right? And in a very short time, money become my God, okay? I was in Inverell and I was working with a couple of people. We went out at night for dinner and whatever. On the way home, drunk, this bloke that I work with pulled a fence pole off the fence and beat me almost to death. I spent 2 weeks in a coma in a hospital with nearly every bone in my body broken. But after that happened, I crawled up to the door of the house and asked for help. And you know what he said to me? He said, "Go away, you junkie." I crawled 2 kilometres up a road to a service station. I'm surprised I was still alive. And the attendant come out there and picked me up and called an ambulance for me. This was a regular occurrence. Okay, I've never shared that with many people. I think your mother doesn't even know a lot of these things, right? So at that time I thought, my bent mind, because I never knew God or anything like that, I was like a cat that had 9 lives. Nothing they could do could kill me. Right? So I started doing all dangerous things, skydiving, bungee jumping. I had no fear of life because nothing could take me out. Right? And just add this in because some people don't understand. I have no sense of smell, okay, from the age of 21. I got thrown out of a taxi at 60 kilometres. Spent another 2 weeks in a coma, right? And it damaged the sensors in the top of my nose that gives my brain an understanding of what I'm smelling. Okay, so not just women become my enemy then, all mankind. Okay, family, friends, whatever. Everyone was a danger to me. Okay, so that was trying to go where I'm going with that. And also the thing that I'm certainly not fond of is that I couldn't tell you how many children I have because people were falling pregnant and abortions and that would happen like on a monthly circumstance. It's a pretty horrible situation. I do know that I have one daughter and that was a very weird situation that I won't go into that doesn't want anything to do with me, and I'm not surprised because I didn't want anything to do with her. And I fled. I decided then as my life in Sydney was so messed up that I needed to get out. So I then changed my name again. And then, but I always knew that Emanuel Arkoulis was my name, but I couldn't change it to that because my mother would have lost it. Right, so I changed it again. So my birth certificate looks kind of interesting. There's lots of different names on my birth certificate. And then I sold my 2 houses. I took 6 months driving to Perth and I paid cash for a house on the North Shore. And I started again. Right. I cleaned up a lot of my life and I kept walking and I kept doing things. And money was just too easy to come by. And then I became a truck driver and I started distributing colour-bond fencing to Western Australia because it never existed over there. So once a month I'd fly to Sydney, I'd buy a truck, I'd fill it with fencing, I'd drive 3 straight days, 14-hour days to Perth, 5,000 kilometres. I'd sell the truck, I'd sell the material, next month I'd do the same thing. And I just kept going down that cycle. I can't even count of how many times I did that. In 4 years I had another 4 houses. Right? But the reason for that was I knew that one day they were going to catch up on me with child support. So whenever I made a profit, I would buy something to bring the profit down. Sooner or later it come back and bit me, right? But that was after I got saved. Then I was never going to move back over here, but I ended up with a girlfriend that was from over here. She moved over there and it was a messy relationship. I don't even know why I was in it. But then I came back over here, but I wouldn't move to Sydney. I moved up to Yamba. And I was here a couple of months and then she left. So I was sort of stranded up here. And then I met your mother. And my trust for your mother was very small because of my trust for women. So this was said she was a loyal person. Well, that's what I was always looking for, but I was always cautious, whether she happened to be that way. But when I first met her, I thought, this lady's too good for me. I'm just going to ruin her life. And she thought the same about me. Anyway, we met. I didn't know she was a believer or whatever. She was very honourable. I did my best to clean up my life. Tongue was heard, but money and greed was very high on my priority. I didn't work very much. Used to go to restaurants every night of the week. And then I started, when I came over here, I was running trailers for Mario's Trailers from Sydney to Queensland once a month for $2,000 a delivery. And I already owned everything. And I already had a lot of money. So then somebody's know about I brought a roadhouse. And Ziona said, don't do it, don't do it. And I said, oh, what would you know? It's just too easy to come by. And Lana said, God's going to save him one day. And my wife said, God would have to take his life away for him to come to Christ. I didn't know any of this stuff, right? So look at your prayers and what you say could work very well. Well, by the time I met Ziona, my life went downhill at a rapid rate. And everything we owned just kept going, flying out the window, down, 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 until there was nothing left. Well, I wanted it back. So I did anything I could to get back on top of things. So we actually walked out of that roadhouse owing as much as we owned. I won't go into the details, but you sort of get the picture of that. And then we moved to Queensland. I wouldn't move down to Port Macquarie, but we moved to Queensland. It got worse and worse and worse and worse. She wanted to come back here because two of her daughters were there, one was with us. And I complained bitterly, and at the end I had nowhere to go and I had nothing left, and I even had to ring my sister up to borrow money. My sister has also become very wealthy. Her and her husband have become self-made billionaires, I think. But constantly working 24 hours a day, they've been all their life. Anyway, so we moved back down here. A lot of you might have a bit of understanding here, but my wife became very ill and first of all she had a numb toe. I'll rapid through this, I think you know most of the picture. I rushed her down to a specialist. They said you need back surgery. And then there was nothing wrong with her but a numb toe. Right? So they brought her back up here. Within a couple of days she woke up in the morning, she was paralysed from one leg down. So I rang up the hospital and they said you need to get her down here straight away. And I'm going like, well, don't you do an ambulance or something? I've got to drive to Newcastle? Like what? And they said, but the doctor's not here. He's gone overseas for 2 weeks. So if keep her there, and if she gets worse, give us a call. Well, the next day she was paralysed from the waist down, both legs, bladder, everything. So then I rushed her down to hospital, and to me, doctors knew everything, and they could fix anything, and they could do anything. So I rushed her down there, and she was down there for a couple of weeks, but at that stage I was driving a truck from Newcastle to Nambucca Heads, doing a paper run in Tamworth to Port Macquarie twice a week, 14 hours on a Monday night, 10 hours on a Wednesday night. So I used to go see her when I wasn't doing the nights and come back and do the 2 nights and vice versa. After a couple of weeks, I think they really neglected her in hospital. She started violently shaking, changing colour, and I pressed the emergency button, no one come. I ran out in the hallway and demanded the nurses to come. They come and they seen her and she was dying. And 11 emergency doctors turned up, right? And they looked around and said, there's nothing that we can do. So here I am on my knees in a hospital. I thought I loved this lady, but I can tell you there was no love there because I didn't even know what it was. So here I am in a hospital floor with a lady in my arms and 11 emergency doctors standing around me. She changed colour and she died. Her eyes sunk in the middle of her head and she was gone. And I was crying out to these doctors to do something, and they said, there's nothing we can do. So I cried out to a God that I never knew. And I was in tears, I was a mess, and said, don't take it from me. And at that stage I realised what I'd had, and I didn't really realise what love was. Then, a couple of minutes later, while I was a mess, this lady opened her eyes and come back to life. And the 11 doctors standing around there said, what did you do? And I'm looking at them going, I didn't do anything. And they're looking at me saying, what would you do? And Zionna's looking at me going, what's wrong? So, I won't go into her story about that, which you probably already know. So then that night, we had a little motorhome then, I went on the motorhome and I used to stay down on the beach until the next morning. But I didn't think she'd be alive when I woke up. So I said to her, you message me as soon as you wake up. I went back to the motorhome and I sat up in the back of the motorhome. It's a weird sensation, but I sat up for 11, 12 hours and I feel like I never blinked. And through that whole time, God showed me a movie of my whole life and all the disgusting things that I'd done. All night. I'd seen everything. And then I made a covenant with God. And I said, if you're real and under this situation, I will care for this woman as long as she lives. So then I decided to abide by that. Now, I didn't really know God, or just thought I was losing the plot. She rang me in the morning, I went in there and then we talked about this situation, not about my life and whatever. But I believe God put me to the test for 6 months, because then I became her full-time carer. They operated on her, she come out worse than she went in. Then I cared for her for 6 months, and at that stage she was dying again, and she wouldn't have been alive, I believe, in another week or two. And then she come to me on one Sunday morning and said to me, I know these 3 godly men that want to pray for my health. I want them to come over, and I wouldn't have a part of it. I wouldn't allow it. She virtually begged me, and I said, fine, if that makes you happy, I'll go in another room. So these 3 men came, I stayed in the other room, they left, I come back out, nothing had changed, and I said, how was your hoodoo voodoo? And she laughed at me. I said, well, like, nothing's changed. So anyway, a few minutes later, she's looking out the window. I can't explain the situation, but I said, Ziona, what's wrong with you? And she said, you wouldn't understand because you don't believe in God. And I thought, you've lost your mind. You've seriously lost your mind. She said, I'll show you. And she got up and walked around the house just like that. But as she got up, I jumped off the couch to catch her because I thought she was going to fall flat in the face. But she walked past me. I can't even explain what was going on in my head from that, other than the weirdest things was like, was she really sick? Was she really paralysed? And I thought I was losing my mind. And I went to the fridge and I think we had a variety of different, we didn't drink a lot at nights, but a variety of different alcohol in there. And I stood at the door and I sculled everything that was in there, and I couldn't get drunk. So here I am thinking, I need to go and get some more alcohol, but I can't drive. Here's my wife ringing everyone else up, people coming out saying, if you never believed then, you should believe now, thinking I'm losing my mind. I thought I was in a dream. They went off to church. I stayed at home walking around in circles going, who do you call? I don't know. There's not a believer that I even know. Who are you going to talk to? So I rang my sister. And she said, she heard the story and she said, oh, the mind works in mysterious ways, and hung up on me. So here I am, lost, no more alcohol left, not drunk, not know what to do. They come home from the church. That night, she went to bed and I sat up in bed all night. Just like that night in the motorhome. I sat up against the bed head and didn't blink all night, thinking I was in a dream. And I thought, when she wakes up, we'll go back to normal. She woke up in the morning, she rolled over, she said, I'm going to get up and make you a coffee. And I thought, that'll be interesting, and she did. So then my journey started. So I get how stubborn someone can be to be led to the Lord, because I reckon I was one of the worst. So then she just started getting better and better and better. And then I started asking questions about this church and different things. I'll skip back a bit and I'll go back to that. The other thing that led me, which I was a bit scared of churches, is that when I was younger, my stepfather started teaching me about the birds and the bees and whatever you want to call it, right? His advice was that when he was younger, he used to go to church to pick up women and sleep around. So you can imagine my thoughts about church at that stage with my lifestyle. One of his good friends that he used to go around to a lot, he gave me advice to, when you're young, go out, sleep with as many women as you want, and then find someone to get married. Now I look at that now and I think, you've been cursed. And you've learnt these things that you shouldn't learn. Right? So that doesn't make what you're doing right, but things that people have fed into your life that you're supposed to look up to, certainly gone right. But then when I got saved, I seen what he was talking about, and I think it's horrible. I really do think these people are supposedly believers. But we'll go to that another time. So anyway, then so I wandered up to the church, and I've got a fear of these people in church because of what I've been told and different things, and I don't even this God and whatever. So I sort of snuck in the back door, and one of these ladies come running up to me, and I went, "You stop right there, lady." Right? I didn't want nothing to do with it. Stop right there. And she went, did a U-turn and went back in. I didn't know it was her husband, but she talked to her husband, and then he come up, and when he come closer, I said, "Don't you come any closer? So, don't you come near me." And he said, "It's all right, just come sit down, whatever." And I went and sat down, and they're doing all weird stuff, talking in tongues, hands in the air. I thought, man, this is a cult. This is crazy. And then, I'm not sure if it was that time or another time, but then I sat up the back, and then afterwards, you know, I mean, they just talked to me like normal people, and I left, and I slowly started my journey. And then the pastor came up and he said, "Why don't you come in for coffee?" I went, "Okay." So I went in there for coffee, and I think I spun him out. I don't think he knew what to do with me. God love him. So I went in there for coffee. I didn't really think much of it, and then he took me in the offices and he said, "So tell me what you know of it. I'm here for coffee." I said, "About what?" And he said, "About God, Jesus." I said, "I've got no idea. I don't even know what you're talking about. Jesus, God." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Do you know about Adam and Eve?" And I said, "Is that a couple that come to your church?" And he laughed at me. And I just looked at him and said, "What are you laughing at?" He said, "You're serious?" I said, "Well, yeah, what?" And he said, "Oh my goodness." He said, "How can a grown man not even know the simplest things?" I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He had to hand me to somebody else because he was too highly educated to start with. How do you practice on a 44-year-old man that knows as much as a 3-year-old child? So the weird thing is like, I don't know how to put this in a way that, I mean, I know churches say there's a circumstance, you go and you get baptised, you get filled with the Holy Spirit and all this. Well, whatever happened to me is not even close to anything that they say. So whenever you're waiting for somebody to be saved, don't ever think that it's going to go down some program, because then they invited me to a men's breakfast. Okay, so I go to a men's breakfast. But in the meantime, I'm driving this truck at nights, right? There's someone talking to me. There's no one there, but there's someone talking to me, telling me scriptures, telling me about God, all these type of things, all the rest of it. And I seriously thought I'd lost my mind. All right? So then I come home and I'm sharing scriptures with Fiona. She's going, "Where on earth did you get them from?" And I said, "This God that you're trying to show me about, he's telling me." She's going, "What? This is just not normal." I go, "I don't know, he's telling me the scriptures, and this is what they mean, and this and this and this and this." And she's going, "What do I do with this bloke?" So then I go to men's breakfast. Okay, it's free food. I don't know, 20 men there, I don't know what they're talking about. So I'm eating the food. There's a bloke across from me in a wheelchair, and all of a sudden I start, like when you hit your funny bone, like not the pain, but that weird sensation, my whole body went like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, what have they done to the food? Have they drugged me? What's going on? Then I start bawling my eyes out in happiness. I'm wiping my eyes and there's no tears. And I look over and this bloke's laughing at me. I'm going, what are you laughing at? And he said, I've been where you've been. I'm going, what on earth are you talking about? He said, you've been filled with the Holy Spirit. I said, I haven't even worked out who Jesus is. What on earth's the Holy Spirit? So then they were patient and they gave me all these things to talk about and whatever. And I'm still, this is how bad I was. Like, every night I'm in the truck, every time I'm hearing these voices, I'm saying, if you're real, turn them red lights to green. And it would happen. And I go, that's just coincidence. Then I'd ask something else. I must have seen thousands and thousands of miracles every day. And I'm going, you've got to do better than that. Then I go to the next men's breakfast, right? This took 5 months. I've been filled with the Holy Spirit. I don't know what to do with it. I've got no idea. Another men's breakfast. I go, okay, I've got to go to this men's breakfast. This will be interesting. So I go to the men's breakfast. Had this pastor come in. We've heard us talk about him, Clive Field, before. Never knew who he was. Had no idea. Big man walked in the door with a book and said, I've got this book. From the time he said that, the only thing I ever remember hearing, like a broken record, you need to buy this book, but you can't read. You need to buy this book, but you can't read. You need to buy this book, but you can't read. That's one of the ways I learnt to know the difference between my voice and God's voice. Because I didn't realise it then, but I realise it now, is that he was saying to me, you need to buy this book. With my voice, but it was him speaking. And I'd be saying to him, but I can't read. And that's with the argument we had the whole through the men's breakfast. Then when that finished, I don't know what they were talking about. I waited for most of the men to leave because I wouldn't let any of them pray for me or talk too much to me about God and whatever. I waited for most of them to leave, went up to Clive and said, Clive, can I buy one of your books? He said, sure. And I said, can you pray for me? The first time anyone ever prayed for me. Well, in person, other than that. He said, put your hand out. I put my hand out, put the book in my hand, put a big hand on top of it. His hand was twice the size of mine. And he was twice as tall. And I looked at him and he said, God, help Emanuel understand this book. I looked at the book, I looked at him and I said, is that all you got? Look, I'm expecting some crazy. And he looked at me. And through his eyes I seen Jesus stand there. And he said, what more do you want? And then he showed me in a split second all them miracles, all the things I'd asked for him, what he'd done. And I was scared almost to death. And I grabbed the book and I ran out the door. And I drove home and I didn't even know what to do. I was so afraid that I didn't know what to say. I walked inside, walked up the stairs and I sat down in the chair and I thought, what do I do with this book because I can't read? And he said, open it. I opened the book and read 80 pages in 20 minutes. And then I said, right, Lord, now you've got my attention. All them miracles that happened to other people were worthless until the one that he did in me that I couldn't deny. Okay? And then, some of you might know, but I was then out of control. I knew his power, I seen him face to face, I knew what he could do, I knew his voice, he was talking scriptures to me, he was guiding me, and he was showing me the filth in his house. And he said, I want you to confront that. And I didn't want any part of it, but I did. And it got me in a lot of trouble, and it got a lot of things. I just share how extent this circuit. I'm not trying just to fear people, right? To the extent of what the unclean world can do through believers, non-believers, people who are in church that say they're believers, right? When I lived in Sydney and I brought 2 houses, a friend of mine rented one of the houses. They were next door to each other. We used to go out drinking, and on our way home one night we got the courtesy bus. And on the bus, this lady started cracking onto me. And Mark, the bloke in the house, came up to me and he said, don't go near her. And I said, oh, I had no intentions to. Afterwards, him and his girlfriend said to me, he said, she's married and her husband's in jail for murder. He kidnapped somebody, he raped her, he cut her up, put her in a garbage bin, and then handed himself into the police, and then pleaded Christianity to get out of a shorter sentence. I get saved, I walk into the church, and guess who I walk into? These two people that I remembered from back then. I'd never met him before, but I knew the wife, but she didn't recognise me. Right? She was one of the ones that was trying to do inappropriate things to me at church, still married. He used to come into church very regularly and be speaking about how he was playing around with his wife, and everyone knew about it, and so did she. My wife became the target, and he started coming after my wife. And I was supposed to go to work one night, and God said, don't go. And I didn't go. He turned up at night to get to my wife. Alright? And I went and confronted him. Alright? And I didn't say I knew about him or anything like that. I said, what on earth are you doing? Oh, I need to get to your wife. And I was going, my wife, my family's off limits to you. I don't even know you. You don't know me. We need to form a relationship before you go anywhere near my family. He said, okay, we'll have coffee on Saturday. So we went down and had coffee on Saturday. God opened up, I had scriptures, the whole lot of all the stuff that was going on that they're speaking about like it's a normal thing in a church environment, right? And I went down there, I was a bit scared, right, of this situation, but God said, I'm with you. So I went in there, sat down, and I started talking different things. He said, and I said, look, it's not appropriate to turn up at my house and this, that, whatever. And he said, if you knew my past, you wouldn't even be talking to me. And God said, now tell him. I sat there and laid his past in front of him on the table. And he couldn't believe that I knew it. All right? And I said, so I'm happy to look at if you've got a changed life, but anything that you share and come into church with doesn't show any change to me at all. So my family's off limits to you until I see you change. Well, he didn't stop. He kept coming. We were having lunch with Alana at McDonald's one day, and I had to drag him out the front to the car park and threaten to take him straight to the police station before he would stop. This is a church environment. I approached the pastor and said, these things are happening in your church. You know what he said to me? You're out of line. You need to be quiet and you need to stop saying these things. So you can see that I'm not a real fan of a lot of ministries these days, right? Now I'm not going to go into more of it, but this was a lot more than what I'm just speaking. And we presented it to ministry and all the rest of it, and even Ziona had dreams and visions from God that we presented to him. If he doesn't highlight and start looking at things that are in his own yard and the sheep that he's supposed to be provided for, God's going to pull it down. And God did exactly that. He closed it down and it no longer exists. Now you've got 50 scattered people with nowhere to go. Alright? So you get the understanding why I'm very skittish, especially around people and women. And I'm not saying that go down that road, but I'm not going to open that door. And when men come, especially to you in Byron Bay, I'm very aware of what they're capable of. And God does tell me what they're like. Now, I can't go up and confront these people and different things, but I can pray against them. I can look into these situations and I can look out for the people that are there. That doesn't make me more special. And I'm telling you, it's certainly not something a gift that you want to stand up for. Right? But it's reality. And a lot of churches are dirtier than what the world is, and I'm saddened by that. Right? But what I've learnt now is to not come against them and to go into warfare for them. And for God to deal with them, and not me. I don't know what else to say other than we should pray. And we're going to have communion. And what God focused on me was to have communion, put on a song, and for each and every one of us just to take the emblems, but remember what they're for. So the bread's for his body, the drink's for his blood. If we've got anything that we need to deal with, we just deal directly with him with them. God will highlight what it does or doesn't need to be.